Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Wednesday, February 9th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 206 days, the game against Michigan in 290 days. This time a year ago, CJ Stroud had yet to throw his first pass at the college level and was still theoretically in a battle for the starting job with Jack Miller and Kyle McCord. After a first season as a starter in which he was a Heisman finalist, how much better can he be this fall? Buckeye Scoop's Kevin Noon just wrote about that and joins me this morning to answer that question. Kevin, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So I guess let's kind of define things to start with, because you anytime you're doing a project like this, it's like, well, there's a bunch of gray area. So here's how you did it. You were just looking at guys who started the season as the starter, regardless of how they finished it. So Justin Zwick was listed as a returning starter for 2004 and 2005. Troy Smith was not the starter in 2005 because he didn't start the season. He was suspended for that first game. And then Todd Beckman was listed for 2008, not Terrell Pryor. So just sort of to define our terms here before we get started. So that's, if you're wondering why we're not talking about Troy Smith, that's why. So with that out of the way, this was a really interesting topic because it feels like Ohio State has had a ton of guys who are multi-year starters at quarterback over the years. And then you look at the results year over year, and they're kind of all over the map.
Yeah, you go through this. I went through this piece. I said, I'm looking for conclusions, and I walked away and I said, it's inconclusive. I'm not really sure because, I'm going back through and I was only going to go to 2000, and then I look at Steve Bellisari, who started 99, 2000, 2001. But, I think you see in large measures, a lot of guys improved in terms of completion percentage, maybe some of those types of numbers and touchdowns. Some guys maybe were up in interceptions because maybe they were a little bit more confident in what they were able to do. And sometimes when you get that confidence, you're going to take some more chances, and you never know what's going to happen there. But it wasn't a case of where there was just undisputable, irrefutable type of information that came back where it's like, well, based over the last 20 some years, we've seen this, but generally the numbers have been better year 2 or year 3 for these guys. JT Barrett may be a little bit of an exception, but that's because he had 3 years there with 15 not counting because that was Cardale Jones starting that year. But I think still some things that create some interesting conversations of what maybe we could expect to see out of CJ Stroud in 2022.
So I mean, the game has changed so much over the last 20 something years that it's, you look at the Steve Bellisari and Craig Krenzel numbers and the touchdown to INT ratios. I'm just going to read the list from 1999 to 2004, which is like a little partial Justin Zwick season, just to give people an idea. Like, if you had these numbers right now, people would be like jumping off the roof. 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 13 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 12 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 15 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Ohio State won a national championship with a quarterback throwing 12 touchdowns and 7 interceptions as a starting quarterback. The game has obviously changed quite a bit, and you can see a very clear line, right about 2016, 2017. We'll call it the Ryan Day line, where all of a sudden all the touchdown numbers are in the 30s and the 40s. So, the game has changed quite a bit over that time. But, who among these guys do you think might have kind of the most, be the most representative of the kind of statistical jump you might see from CJ Stroud this year?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Fields, but to touch upon a previous point you made, I think that there's even a third generation in there. There's kind of the Cooper Tressel, Tressel, we're going to win with defense. The punt is the most important play, where the numbers were, one way. Then there was the Urban. We really like the read option type of quarterback, and now there's the Ryan Day era. So I think that you see 3 there. So now that we're in the Ryan Day era, that really means that you have to kind of look at Justin Fields, and Justin Fields' numbers in 20 were stunted because of the nature of that season. That was the COVID year. They only play 8 games. So you have to really look at that more on a per game basis, more so than just the overall number, because he throws for 2,100 yards in 8 games. He throws 70.2%, which Ohio State has only had 3 quarterbacks who have quote unquote qualified, just to kind of use some other statistical lingo out there that have qualified that have thrown for 70%. And CJ Stroud was one of them, setting the school record at 71.9. So I kind of look for Stroud and Fields to be similar in terms of the passing numbers. We know that Stroud is not the type of runner that Justin Fields was, but I think that they're both playing kind of in the same sandbox, and because of that, that's where I would kind of try and draw my comparisons if we were really trying to find some conclusions to take from this.
Yeah, Fields played 8 games in 2020. If you multiply that times 1.75 to kind of prorate it to like what would it have been over a 14-game season, he would go from a 67.2% passer completion rating to 70.2, so a jump of 3%. And then his yardage total would have gone from 3273 to 3675, so a jump of about 400 yards. So, you would see a significant little uptick there from numbers that were already pretty darn impressive. And, to your point from earlier, you saw an uptick in interceptions too. He went from 3 interceptions in 2019 when he was being very cautious and throwing the ball away a lot. And, people were criticizing him for maybe being too cautious at times. Only had 3 interceptions that whole season. Had 3 interceptions the next year in the Indiana game alone, finished with 6 interceptions in just those 8 games. So, you take the good, you take the bad, as the old Facts of Life theme song said. Unquestionably though, better completion percentage, more yardage. You're gonna take that if you're, that is unquestionably progress. So, when you look at those numbers and Stroud's numbers from last year, which are, already some of the most impressive in Ohio State history, what is a reasonable guess for what Stroud's numbers look like this upcoming season based on what we have seen in the past?
And that's going to be the question, because what happens here in terms of we go through and we look at how Stroud's season went, and Stroud's numbers were he didn't play in the Akron game. He had one game where he didn't play. I have the number here somewhere. I'm looking for it. Stroud threw the ball obviously a lot in the first half, didn't have as many throws in the second half because so many games were in hand, but 41% of his pass attempts were in the second half. But you remember he had 32 attempts against Oregon, 24 against Nebraska, 28 against Michigan, 27 against Utah. If Ohio State is able to shore some things up on the defense in some of these games, are not, don't go in as deep as they went last year. Does he get pulled earlier? We know that this is probably going to be Stroud's final season with Ohio State. Do you get Kyle McCord? Do you get Devin Brown some playing time there? Oh, by the way, you have a tremendous running back in Trevion Henderson, and that room is pretty solid, and you're bringing in a new offensive line coach, and I'm sure part of his mission is to get the run game a little bit more in order. So you don't know. So I'm not somebody who's saying that there's going to be just this huge uptick maybe in yardage, but I think maybe you see somebody who's a little bit more accurate. If you look at Justin Fields from 19 to 20, he was up about 2.8 completions and attempts per game. His passing percentage went up about 3%. His yards per game went up about 29 yards per game. His interceptions were only down 0.2. His touchdowns were down about 0.2, and his interceptions were up obviously little more than 0.5. So if we're looking here, could we see a situation of where CJ Stroud's going to attempt more than 441 passes? Well, if Ohio State plays in a Big Ten championship game, obviously we could see Ohio State playing more games. Could he improve on that 70, let's just call it 72% completion rate? I think he could. I really think he could. Mac Jones had the record. I think it was like 77.1, 77.9, something like that. I think that even with the losses of Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, with Jackson Smith and Jigba, with Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, and then the new guys coming in, and not to mention Jaden Ballard as well. I don't want to leave anybody out. He's going to have a very good receiver room to work with, and it takes 2 to tango. You put it on the numbers, and if somebody drops it, that counts against your completion percentage. But I think they could be pretty good there. I'm expecting to see some of those numbers going up just for the sheer fact of I think that Ohio State's going to end up playing more games. Is it going to be in that small range of a Justin Fields? Maybe. We've seen some other quarterbacks prior see much larger improvements, but it's one thing to go up from 58.3% like Braxton Miller in 2012 to 63.5. than it is to go from 72% to 77%, because it's just that much more perfection that you have to have out there.
Yeah, you do at some point kind of hit a ceiling where you can get incrementally closer to just about as well as you can possibly do in an offense, considering you're going to have throwaways, you're going to have guys drop balls occasionally. Yeah, it is much easier to start your career at 56.6%, like Terrell Pryor did in 2009, and see an increase of more than 8%. It's like, well, yeah, he improved way more. It's like, well, the baseline was a little lower to start with there with during the Terrell Pryor era. What's interesting about Ohio State this year is Stroud's back, and that obviously is going to be a huge piece of the narrative around this year's team. But if you look at the rest of the team, this is a really unusual year for Ohio State because they're really not losing that much production to the NFL as, on their normal scale. So Bill Connolly of ESPN just did his rankings of teams by returning production. He's the guy who does SP+. We talk about that on the show every once in a while. The Buckeyes are 24th overall in the country in returning production. There really aren't any other national title contenders in the top 40. Clemson is 41, and you saw the kind of year that Clemson had last year where they had a real step back season. Ohio State, by Ohio State standard, had a step back season that resulted in merely a Rose Bowl championship. Ohio State this year 53rd in returning offensive production, and you're losing Garrett Wilson, you're losing Chris Olave, you're losing Jeremy Ruckert, and Master Teague factors in there a little bit, but that's pretty high for Ohio State to have that many that much returning offensive production. And on the defensive side of the ball, they are 13th in defensive production returning. You look at those numbers, and it seems like this is a team that's poised to take not just a step forward, but potentially a big step forward this fall.
Yeah, starting on the offense, you kind of rattled through the names that are gone, and people may not think about it on first blush that Jackson Smith-Njigba was the leading receiver for Ohio State. For as much as Garrett Wilson, as much as Chris Olave meant, JSN was the guy. I mean, especially his last couple of games of the season. I mean, he just took it to another level at that point. You lose very little out of the running back room with the loss of Master Teague in terms of what the numbers of production was, because it was so much the Trevion Henderson show. You lose your number one tight end and Jeremy Ruckert, but this is Ohio State. They only use the tight end so much, so that really doesn't matter at that point. So much of it is coming back there, and with the infusion of new talent, especially in the receiver room, if these guys can get on the field here this year, I mean, that's a big if right there. And then you bring back a quarterback who finished fourth for the Heisman. He, as much as we want to talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba in the Rose Bowl, we saw a hell of a game out of CJ Stroud too. Sure, he would like to have the interception back and some plays like that back, but it is what it is. On the defensive side of the ball, you go through and you look at all the mock drafts and everything else, and obviously we're aware of the names that are gone. Losing somebody like Haskell Garrett is a big deal. I mean, but was he huge in terms of the production that Ohio State had? There were so many young players. You lose Sevyn Banks by way of the transfer portal. He really didn't get to play that much last year based on everything. So you look at all these key positions. You look in the secondary. You look on the line. You look at linebacker. Oh, by the way, you bring in a bunch of new defensive coaches as well. And while this transformation isn't going to be something that happens overnight, they're going to be dealing with a lot of players who are still relatively young. They're going to be able to buy into this system. So you're exactly right. It's bad news for a lot of people with what Ohio State's returning production numbers are.
Yeah, Bill Connolly actually said in his tweet promoting this piece, the exact quote was, "Ohio State in the top 25 is a very, all caps, very bad sign for the rest of the Big Ten." And the reason why that is Ohio State kind of has the default assumption is Ohio State has a higher level of talent than most other teams in the conference. So you're going to take a little bit of something. It's going to take a little something unusual for other teams to be able to catch up and potentially pass Ohio State. And next year, Michigan, just for comparison's sake, Ohio State has 13% returning, or is 13th in the country in returning production on defense. Michigan is 13th in the country in returning production on offense. I don't know, that's going to be an interesting matchup. Michigan on the defensive side of the ball, 124th in the country in returning production on defense. They've got some holes to fill. Ohio State's offense has substantially fewer holes to fill. Penn State, just to include them, 51st on offense, 103rd on defense. Both of those teams, Michigan is 67th, Penn State 72nd. I mean, there is a long way down to those production numbers. And this is maybe not quite as perfect a comparison as it would have been 5 years ago, because now you're potentially bringing in more transfers, and you can patch over holes. USC's number on offense doesn't necessarily matter as much because now you have Caleb Williams coming in to save the day. So you have it's not your returning production, but it's someone's returning production. But overall, Kevin, I think I don't want to go crazy here, but this all does seem like it's sort of shaping up for last season to potentially be a little bit of an aberration as far as Ohio State goes. And, maybe more a return to what, the level of football that Ohio State fans are, I don't want to say demanding, but, the level of football that Ohio State fans have come to expect over the years.
Oh, they're demanding it. They demanded the field to look a certain way. They're very demanding people. But I think we will look at as 21 as a bit of a blip on the radar. But certainly there have been a couple of blips here through the years, and fortunately, one way or the other, they go and they address it. And I think it's a matter of how long it takes until the next blip arrives. And I think that you see a staff that Ryan Day has put together. I think it's one that could sit there and certainly right the ship on a lot of things, because I think now they have a little bit more of a single-minded focus. I think it's an opportunity. They're certainly going to be running Jim Knowles' defense. This isn't going to be a case of running the defense that Ryan Day hates going against, therefore that's the defense that they want to see. It's going to be Knowles' defense. And with the amount of talent that they're returning, I think it's just going to be, I'm really excited to see what somebody like Josh Proctor is going to be able to look like in this type of situation. I'm really excited to see what's going to come from the linebacker room. I really think that there's going to be an opportunity with some of the things that they're going to do defensively that's going to take some of the breaks off of the defensive line. I think that I'm not saying that we're going to see the type of move pre-Hafley and with Hafley. I mean, that was huge. I mean, that was the aberration. You don't see that type of improvement, but I think we're going to see a significant improvement with an offense that is already a very proven commodity, and I think could in some ways be even better.
And one more school to mention, since we talked about Penn State, we talked about Michigan. One other school of some note on the schedule for 2022. Schedule a team very early on the schedule, in fact, for 2022. The Buckeyes season opener against Notre Dame. Notre Dame 113th in the country in returning offensive production, 56th on defense. So just one more thing to just kind of file away as you're trying to sort out in your head how that game might go. There's a lot of transfer portal stuff still to come, and I've got to go through spring ball and all that kind of stuff. But that is those are a couple more numbers to keep in mind as you're sort of trying to figure out how this season might go for Ohio State. So if you want to know more about how this season might go for Ohio State, make sure you check out the Big Me Kickoff podcast that Kevin hosts. He will be doing another episode later on this week. Tony Gerdman and I dropped a new episode of Buckeye Weekly yesterday. We'll have more coming up a little later on this week. We will have, these are listener question shows. So this is you guys asking us questions. You asked, we answered. So lots of questions on a whole ton of topics, mostly Ohio State football, some just random nonsense, which, people seem to enjoy as well. So you can find those. You can find the Big Me Kickoff podcast. You can find Around the Oval. You can find Gives in the Bank. You can find them all wherever you're listening to this. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. You can subscribe right there. Leave us a 5-star rating and review as well, which helps other folks find those shows, and we do genuinely appreciate all of your 5-star reviews on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Spotify just started doing reviews semi-recently, so if you're listening on Spotify, please do leave us a review there. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that bell, subscribe to our channel. That way you get notified every time I post a new video, and also hit that thumbs up on all the videos you watch. We really do appreciate that as well. That helps other folks find those videos due to the magical YouTube algorithm that no one really understands, but the thumbs up helps us, so we appreciate that every single time you guys do that. So that'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.